Write what you know. That's one of the most common pieces of writing advice. And it makes sense when you hear it. But what about magic and wardrobes and faraway lands? Dragons and sea monsters and ogres? Space battles and time machines? The list goes on. Does anyone really know about those things? What does write what you know even mean? And is there maybe something even better? Welcome to the Epilogue. I'm Michael Stubblefield, and I am here today with David Slayton, who has kindly agreed to join and talk about his writing craft. Thank you again for joining, David.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
David is the author of, several books. He is the author of the Adam Binder series of books, including White Trash Warlock, Trailer Park Trickster, and Deadbeat Druid. And in the same universe, as we can see in the banner behind him, the Rogue Community College, which was I think the most recent one that he's done in that world. But you've also stepped out of that world recently with A Dark Moon, Shallow Sea, which is different. It's different from the Warlock books. So David has degrees in both English and in history, and is a 2-time Colorado Book Award finalist. Let's start talking about, let's start where it started. White Trash Warlock. Now, you have said in a few other interviews that, you wrote the kind of book that you always wanted to read, but could never find. Something that represented you as a character. Would you like to talk about that for a second?
Sure. So White Trash Warlock is the story of Adam Binder. He's a broke gay witch from Guthrie, Oklahoma, where I'm from. And I share two of those identities with him, right? Being from Oklahoma and also being gay myself. He also is a high school dropout, which is true of me as well. And I love urban fantasy. I think it's such a fantastic genre. But reading it and exploring it, I often didn't see myself reflected in it. Very much the same with high fantasy or epic fantasy, which Dark Moon, Shallow Sea is. So I wanted to write a book that focused on a character who shared my identity, as well as some of the background details of my biography, being, growing up poor, growing up in a trailer in the woods, with a more rural background. Also, I wanted to kind of bend some of the ideas around urban fantasy, which usually focuses on a protagonist who is really powerful, like they walk on the stage throwing fireballs and are, incredibly powerful from go. And I chose to, in Adam, create a character who does not have that. He's not all powerful by any means and is often running away from threats bigger than himself, which is a very common theme in his world. He's very low on the magical totem pole. So, I got very lucky. My publisher liked it. They liked the title. They decided to give me 3 books in the series to go, and then they picked up the spinoff for Community College, and now we're putting out 2 more books in the Adam series itself with a bit of a time jump. So it's been very successful, and just very, very grateful to my publisher and my agent that I've been able to get these out there.
Very interesting. When do you have a timeline when we could expect the next couple of books there?
Absolutely. So Blackstone will be putting out Redneck Revenant, which is book 4 in the Adam series, in October of 2025, so this year. And then next year, we'll have book 6, Backwoods Banshee, as well as book 2 in the Gods of Night and Day series, Dark Moon, Shallow Sea, Silent Passive Night. So you'll get 2 books from me next year from Blackstone.
Bonus. Okay. Well, it's very interesting that you mentioned your main character being underpowered, as it was an intentional kind of choice in contrast to the very commonly, like, even if somebody starts out in a book where they seem like they're underpowered, it's very often the case that they'll end up, no, they're actually they just didn't know how to turn on their juju or something. Was there something specifically other than just reacting to like common market tropes that made that decision for you?
Yeah, so I write the heroine's journey, which rather than having the hero's journey. So if you don't know the difference distinctly, everyone I think knows the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell. It gets used constantly. You can see it in Star Wars, etc. The heroine's journey, though, there's a great book by Gail Carriger, one of my favorite authors. She did a nonfiction
She's
book.
wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, she did a great nonfiction book on the heroine's journey. So if you need to know more about it, pick up her book on it. Very small, taking no time at all. But in the hero's journey, Wonder Woman, the first movie, is the hero's journey. Wonder Woman ends it alone. So it's not about gender by any means. In the hero's journey, the hero defeats the great evil, but they end up alone. It's all about them. The heroine's journey is someone has to amass a found family or a collective group of people in order to defeat the evil or to win the battle. And that's what I write. So Adam, while the series is the Adam Binder series, and he is obviously the titular character, it's the allies and the friends and the family he's chosen, as well as the blood family he chooses to keep, that end up helping him save the day. So that really was part of it. And if you have a central protagonist, a central hero who is to everything, that larger grouping of people can't matter as much. So I wanted him to always be reliant on others. There's also an important part of it where in urban fantasy, because the series tend to go on for a long time, right? They might go on for 20 books, which I don't see the Adam series going on that long. We'll see what happens. There's a problem of what Sean McGuire calls the Sailor Moon effect, right? Where the characters just get more and more powerful and powerful. So if you start them off at a higher tier, and I guess to use a little bit of like Dungeons and Dragons parlance, if they keep leveling up, they'll have nowhere to go as that series continues, unless you find ways to depower them, etc., which I think sometimes readers feel cheated by. So I also made sure to start Adam at a very low place so that I have room for him to grow. His amount of magic, his amount of power doesn't necessarily grow in the series, but he does learn to use what he has better. The comparison I use is, it's like a singer or someone. They don't get a different voice or get more voice, but they learn how to use what they have more adeptly.
Now, let's go back to speaking of your journey. Speaking of journeys, your journey through your work here. Now, Adam comes from a background similar to you. You grew up in Oklahoma. You moved to Denver. You left school. You had a very similar character journey. You don't know about being a warlock necessarily. I might be wrong, but you haven't fought in a lot of cosmic battles in invisible worlds. I know a lot of people say, write what you know, but I think there's a different lesson here. Maybe you're bringing something to it that is uniquely you, but you're not, this isn't just, David's life in Oklahoma, and his journey, his road trip to Denver. This isn't Kerouac or something. So it bridges a gap between a lot of readers who might have felt something missing, builds an emotional connection to have that character there who is the person that they want to see put into that story.
Well, first of all, you kind of hinted at this. If somebody read my biography, they would be bored. It's a pretty, this is what I did in Oklahoma. This is how I got to Denver, right? As you kind of alluded to. That would be dull. Urban fantasy does have certain tropes and it does have certain conventions. I like to try to twist and play with those as much as possible. There's usually like an investigative element to a detective. A lot of heroes and heroines in urban fantasy have some kind of a detective angle. Sean McGuire's October Day, Kim Harrison, Rachel Morgan. They all have a certain about investigative or police or detective angle. Adam has some of that, so I kept that. But again, I tried to mess with it. For example, he interacts a lot. You mentioned Arjun. He interacts a lot with the elves. And when I looked at him, wanted to include the elves, I wanted to include something along the Fae, a very common trope in fantasy and urban fantasy. I tried to figure out how can I make them different? How can I put a new spin on it? Because I get bored, right? If it's just the same old trope, it's the same old convention, the same old plot device. So I want to say, all right, so what can I do with elves that would be unique? Well, what if they have sort of an obsession with preserving the past? Because one of my degrees is in history, and I love the past, and I get sad when I encounter ruins and things. There's a part of me that mourns what was lost. And then what if we could give them also sort of an obsession with cosplaying the past? What if they dress like they fell out of the 1940s? And there's a nice line in Redneck Revenant, might be Backwards Banshee, the recent books where I'm working on, so they're blending together a bit, where they finally moved up to like answering services because they still haven't mastered smartphones or texting. They're slowly coming into the modern era. They're getting here. We're working on it.
Some of us still haven't mastered the texting thing.
Yeah, I try to take urban fantasy tropes and play with them and try to make something old new again. As well as my whole goal in fantasy is, whether it's epic or urban, is to transport you somewhere, show you something, tell you a story, entertain you. I think that's a writer's first job, is to entertain you, not to teach you a lesson, not to try to, bore you, but to entertain you. And because that's why we read mostly. And then while you're there, you get to experience something a little different, something a little new, and then you get to come home and bring that with you. So that's why I look at, when we're in the spirit realm, when we're interacting with these characters, these places, what can I do that you haven't seen before? How can I surprise you?
Actually, there's an interesting point that the Adam Binder series is a urban fantasy. Now you have rural origins of your character and some scenes that definitely take place in rural places, in rural spaces, but a lot of it is urban. Is there something magnetic about the urban environment that kind of pulls the story in that direction, or was that more personal?
I think it's more personal, but I also think it's a great chance for fish out of water. Transporting Adam from rural Oklahoma to Denver. And Denver's a small city, right? It is urban fantasy, but most urban fantasy takes place in San Francisco, Chicago, New York. Like, it's often in LA, like Stephen Blackmore's wonderful Eric Carter series. It's usually taking place in big cities, big cities. Denver isn't. And one of the things that I love about Denver is that you can jump in a car and be in the mountains in an hour, right? Or go the other way and 45 minutes to an hour, you can be on the plains, right? And I wanted to be able to use a city, and I know Denver, so it was kind of obvious, but I wanted a city where that transition point between rural and urban is pretty close. Chicago, I spent plenty of time in Chicago, and it kind of borders on that, to be honest. It doesn't take long to really get out into, farm country in Chicago. My in-laws are there, so I spend a decent amount of time in Chicagoland. But it was important to me to still be able, for Adam to still be able to kind of access the rural vibe of things without it being too far away for him, because that is his background.
Oh, there's something island-like about Denver. That's true.
Precisely. It's also a crossroads, between our airport and where we lay in the country, being at the foot of the mountains. It's a liminal place in many ways, and that's really important when you're writing about a character who moves between the mortal realm and the spirit realm constantly.
Let's talk about your world building, about your magic. There's always in urban fantasy something of a connection to the everyday. But there's something especially mundane about the way that you are weaving in the Adam Binder series. You have common things like dragons and elves and tarot cards, but he's gluing a car engine together through force of will sometimes. Or, that has an effect on the story that definitely pulls it, that grounds it in a different way. And I think some of your character background choices interacting with the setting.
I think you kind of hit on it. I think for urban fantasy, one of the key things is that the magic is also in the mundane. If you look at Charlene Harris's Sookie Stackhouse novels, Sookie is always cleaning and she's always stressing out about money. These are two very important things about her. And what that does is it grounds her. It grounds her for the reader in the world. You understand Sookie because she takes a job with the vampires. I think it's the third book. It might be the second. I read them a while ago. She doesn't necessarily want the job, but she needs the money for new gravel for her driveway. And she starts thinking about, if I do this job, that'll be like $5,000. And then I can get the fancy gravel, the kind that locks together and doesn't scratch the car up as much, when you drive on it. And that's the kind of mentality that I grew up with. It's the kind of mentality that I really understood about Sookie right away, because I grew up with, we could eat that, but if we eat that, then we won't have food for 3 days. Whereas if we make a big pot of cheap spaghetti, that'll get us through 3 or 4 days. And so my mom had to do those kind of calculations all the time, and I sort of learned to do them as well. I still eat like a poor person, even though I have a job in software. But if you give me a pint of ice cream, it is generally gone because there's a part of my brain that thinks, I'll never get another one again, right? This is the only time I'm ever going to have this treat, because it's like, no, you can go buy ice cream anytime. But my mind is still trained to that. that plays from the trailer. And Adam has a lot of that. Money is always kind of on his mind. And that's contrasted with his brother, who has moved to Denver and is a doctor and has plenty of money. So he doesn't obsess about those little things the way Adam does, calculating, can I buy, like, he would never buy a latte. He would only buy a cup of coffee because a latte is going to cost so much more. Even if it is better, he doesn't want to get used to them because he can't afford them. That's the kind of calculation he's always running. So the magic part of that is, I love that you picked up on the car, that he holds the car together through force of will, because I think we've all been there. If you've ever driven a beater, if you've ever been that poor, you're constantly running this calculation of, and it just hold together, please, for one more paycheck, or running out of gas because you just really can't afford to put gas in it. So you're hoping that the gas will just go a few more miles to get you to your shift so you can get some money from today's tips or whatever. That's kind of where it all is. And it's obvious for me that Adam would see his magic through that sort of lens. And then the magic that he can do is also very tied to who he is mentally. So Adam has certain mental health issues, which I also have. So I wove them into his character, and I wanted them to be kind of a strength for him. One of the things about him is he's really sensitive. So he's not super powerful, but if something is trying to hide behind an illusion, behind a glamour, Adam is likely to see it when more powerful magical beings can't, because he's so far under the radar. Things hiding there are visible to him. So he has a certain way of seeing the world. And that's kind of a common thing with my main characters. You'll see that with Rafe and Dark Moon Shallow Sea. He can see in the dark. So having a different way of seeing the world is a very David Slayton kind of device. So I need to be careful not to do it in my next project. Isaac in Rogue Community College does not, but he can smell. He's like a shark on land. He can smell blood and detect blood from, he's like a walking forensics laboratory. A total side note, but Isaac crosses over and interacts with Adam and Vic and some of the other people in Redneck Revenant.
In the new one?
In Redneck Revenant. And it is
in Revenant. Okay. That's the 2025 one.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is very fun to bounce Isaac off of Vic. those two have a fun dynamic, I should say.
Okay.
But yeah, I think the magic needs to have grounding again, so that it makes it easier for the reader to kind of be able to see themselves in that place, as well as to be able to understand it. One thing you will notice about my magic systems is they're not like Mistborn, Brandon Sanderson, very tightly diagrammed, right? If they have the power and they ingest this metal, this is the ability. And you can almost, with those kinds of magic systems, like they would translate really well into like a game manual. Like it'd be very easy to create a gaming system, right? I have this many spell slots and I can cast this spell. If I have these reagents, I have this score in my intelligence or my wisdom, D&D nerd here, obviously. And I didn't want that. I always want my magic to leave me room to move. So I try to avoid super hyper-defined magic systems so that I have the option to expand later so I'm not painted into a corner with heavy, like the Fae cannot lie, right? That's one of those rules you hear a lot. I don't use that one. I really don't I'm really careful because I'm trying to think of a long-term architecture for a series of, if I make an absolute law like that, I'm bound by it for the next, however many books.
I've heard that described as hard world building versus soft world building. And I guess it goes beyond just magic systems, but there's a difference between, say, Brandon Sanderson, who is he seems to enjoy that. Like that's why he makes so many different magical things is making the rules. And then like Miyazaki films where it's just all about like you watch this and you just felt something, but you can't really always explain it.
Yeah, and I like mystery and wonder in my magic. I like it to be a little more dreamlike. And there's no shade. Sanderson's readers love that style from him. I have plenty of friends who they love that about his magic system, that it is all so tightly defined. So there's no right or wrong. It's just what's right or wrong for your story, your book that you're crafting.
I saw another interview where you'd actually talked about Bobby, and you talked about exploring the process of exploring his character, building a little bit more empathy for him as a character, because you said you didn't really like him at first. And that obviously has had its effect on the story. And I even hazard like one of the main plots of the second book wouldn't even have occurred otherwise if that had not been the case. So there's something there about exploring those characters that builds out your connection to them, as well as there's opportunities.
Bobby's tough. He was a tough character to write, but I have a lot of sympathy for him. Most of my family is still in Oklahoma, and I'm kind of the one that left. So I have a lot of sympathy for Bobby. There's a lot of me in him as well. So his need to get away, his need to not be from Oklahoma.
He's the one who left, actually, exactly. Like you did. So there was a split there.
And he really doesn't want to be Bobby Jack. He wants to be Robert Binder, Dr. Robert Binder. He wants to forget that he's from backwoods Oklahoma and be seen as this educated, worldly person. And material wealth is very important to him. That one I don't have in common, but I do. It was important to me leaving Oklahoma to travel the world, to do what I could, to try to educate myself, to get beyond what I knew, try to broaden my mind as much as possible. And I'm among the only family members I have that have ever left the country, who've ever gone to Europe, ever traveled anywhere broadly. And that's important to me, that I expand my mind. So I have a lot more sympathy for Bobby, I think, than most people do. But we are getting most of our information about Bobby comes from Adam. And Adam has very good, very legitimate reasons, but very personal reasons for his feelings about his big brother.
There's actually something about the first book which kind of, in the course of the book, kind of vindicates a little bit of Bobby near the end. And then in the second book actually kind of goes the other way and vindicates Adam in Bobby's behalf as well.
Well, they're both holding secrets, and those secrets are, I grew up as a family, again, with very big family secrets that people like to hide and hint at. And that's happening here. They're both sitting on a lot of secrets, and Bobby is sitting on a whopper, which I think is what you're alluding to. And it's definitely affected his life and affected his choices. I get some of the most satisfying emails I get are from readers who start the book with, "I hate Bobby so much," and then I get another email like, a month later with like, "Okay, I get him now. I don't like him, but I get him." And then I think by the end of the third book, by the end of Debbie Druid, Bobby and Adam are in a good place. And so there's a spoiler, but it gives readers get insight. And I think that's true of most people, right? If you encounter someone and you don't get along with them, you just don't know them yet, often, right? Some people are just jerks. Let's not sugarcoat that. But one of the things I've often found in my life is that someone I meet who I immediately clash with might just end up being my best friend before it's all over. And I think that's fascinating.
Matt Bird, The Secrets of Story, I think, talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy, like being able to understand a character versus liking a character. Obviously, the Sopranos were a big thing, and then everybody was trying to build unlikable characters in their next TV shows, but they were missing the part that you had to kind of understand and really relate to where this unlikable character was coming from in order to really want to know their story.
Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "I'm going to be evil today." I truly don't think anybody does that. I think what happens is we all think we're doing the best that we can. That's a big theme in Darkman Shall the Sea, right? The bad guys aren't bad to be bad. They're bad because they think they're doing the right thing for everyone.
Speaking of going from a place of understanding characters, there is a place where every character's background affects them, affects their choices, affects the story, but it's not forcing the plot. And I think that where I'm going with this is building a story which is inclusive and diverse. You have characters with different backgrounds. How do you make sure that you're representing different people and you're making their character history part of the story, but not making their character history the story? Obviously, we have characters in your stories who are from diverse backgrounds, who are gay, who are from different cultural backgrounds, but you make sure that it contributes to it. It adds to it in a very positive way.
Well, none of us are a monolith, right? And if there's so many different ways to think about this question and to answer it, so I'm going to try to thread a few different needles here, and this may take a minute. Adam is gay. Adam is not just gay. I am gay. My eyes are blue. I don't think about my eyes being blue 100 times a day. I don't think about it ever, really, honestly. Adam is very much the same way, and I think every character is that way. We all are who we are. Those things are part of us. The fact that Vic is Mexican, the fact that Sarah is black, the fact that these characters all do have an identity to them. But my world isn't filled with just, straight white dudes. So, my world is not filled with blue-eyed people. And it would be really boring if it was. My world is not filled with just gay white dudes of a certain age either. I've been to those parties and they are super boring. My world would be boring if it was not diverse, if I didn't have straight friends, bi friends, pan friends, asexual friends, and then everything else with it. With identity. And one of the things that does annoy me about identity is that when someone tries to erase it and say, well, I don't see color. Doing that, you're excluding all of these things that make up that person. You're excluding their history, their heritage, who their parents were, what they learned to cook, what they eat, what they don't, everything that goes in. So when I weave a character, I don't just weave in, I don't make any kind of a checklist, right? I'm going to have a black character today. I'm going to have a gay character today. I don't go down a checklist because I find that boring too. I've read those books too, where you felt like you were reading a diversity manifesto, or it's and here is the black lesbian and her best
dehumanizes some of the characters in a way because they are just a checklist.
Exactly. Anytime we reduce people to labels, I think we are so much more than that. And the trick of that is just to really get inside somebody's head and heart. And if you are writing outside your identity, then what's really critical is sensitivity readers. Is my friend Veronica, for example, helps me with hair, with natural hair, with black hair. There's a very minute moment in Rogue Community College where Isaac needs to use Hex's shampoo, and Hex is a black woman. And I just had to stop for a second and think and be like, he's in Hex's room. He has to take a shower and wash his hair. She may not have the same products that I would as a white dude, white blonded. So, reach out to my friend and say, what kind of products would she have? And just get those little details right. And that applies to everything. Your writing should be mindful. You should be conscious, going back to what we were saying about setting. Characters are who they are. Now, you don't want to bore your reader, so you're not going to sit here and give a full dissertation on everyone's hair products. But there's ways to use those little moments to make those characters seem like real people at another level. And I think that's the key thing is we are all diverse, but we are all human. And having those conversations can help humanize. And that's critical because if the character can be humanized, you can empathize with them. You can understand them. Regardless of who they are in the plot. And someone's like, well, what if my character's a robot or my character's an alien or a dragon? Here's the thing. Look at Star Trek. The most sympathetic and interesting characters in Star Trek are not human. Spock, Data, a 7 of 9. And they are, and yeah, I know, Borg converted from human and half human Vulcan, shush.
Great.
My point is that those characters all struggle with their humanity. The holographic Doctor and Voyager, they're all struggling with the question of their humanity, even though they are not. And in doing so, they become some of the most interesting and compelling characters in that universe. So circling all that back, if you are going to write outside your experience, sensitivity readers is the key thing. Get somebody who can read your work and make sure. There is a disabled angle in Dark Moon Shallow Sea. And I was very grateful to Kendra Merritt, who's a local author, and she did a sensitivity read for me on that to make sure. Now, the other side of this, I told you this is going to be a little bit long-winded, is if you are going to write a main character, and that's the important phrase, if you are going to write an important character, a main character who is not of your identity. I am a gay white man. Adam is a gay white man. I can weave my experience into his confidently. That is not the experience of every gay white man, right? Adam and I do not share that with everyone. And I'm fully aware of that. And there have been people who read it who have said, that is not my experience as a gay white man. And how dare you write that? I'm like, look, fully acknowledge our experience is not all going to line up the same. But be very cognizant of your main character. And are you trying to tell someone else's story? So while all of my books contain, for example, women of color, I'm not going to write a lead character who's a woman of color and have her talk about what it means to be a woman of color and talk about her experience, her oppression, what she's had to overcome. I want women of color to be writing those stories. Those are their stories to tell. Those are their stories to convey. And so I do have a kind of a strong own voices
Mhm.
I'm a strong proponent of own voices in that regard. If I'm going to write a book about racism, then I should be somebody in America who is not white. Because what do I know? I'm never going to get that right, no matter how many sensitivity readers I have. So just that is one thing I do encourage people to think about if you're going to write a main character whose identity is different than yours. And occasionally in saying that, someone will say, well, I don't need to be a pirate to write about pirates. No, but that's different, right?
Yeah.
Being a wizard or a warlock, that's a different thing than writing about the oppression that someone has felt or the experience someone has felt.
Right.
I do
Well, that experience is all imaginary anyway. You're not trying to connect it to somebody's to this world.
And you're not co-opting it. You're not trying to make money off of the back of someone else's pain. And that's really, to me, very important. So anyway, there's my little soapbox moment about home voices, as well as, to me, to make a book diverse is the naturalest thing in the world, because my world is diverse. You're not going to sit down in a group of me and my friends and be like, oh, they all look and talk the same. It's just not how we are.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. I love that about my world.
So let's talk about Rogue Community College. First of all, what was it that you wanted to explore in this one that wanted to be a spin-off story versus working it into a little bit more directly Adam's circle?
There's a few things about Rogue Community College so it's urban fantasy, right? It's set in the same, I call it the Binderverse at this point. It's set in Adam's universe. That said, it's really high fantasy posing as urban fantasy because they don't spend much time on Earth. Trying to figure out how Rogue Community. So the genesis of Rogue Community College is this. It's sort of an accidental book in that it wasn't really supposed to happen. So when I signed the contract for White Trash Warlock and its first two sequels, my partner and I happened to be in Oregon, and we both love Oregon. It's beautiful. If we weren't in Colorado, we'd probably be there. And my publisher happens to be in Oregon. Blackstone is out of Ashland. So when there's a Shakespeare festival there, it's like, let's go out for the weekend, a long weekend. Let's go to meet with my editor, my acquiring editor at the time. Let's go to the offices, see Blackstone. Let's go to some Shakespeare and drive around and just go to I'd always wanted to go to the Oregon coast, and somehow, despite all my trips out to Ashland for Shakespeare, I never made it. So, and there happens to be a direct flight to Medford. So all these things lined up. So we spent a long weekend in Oregon. And as we're driving around the Oregon coast, and I wanted to see the redwoods, I grew up with Return of the Jedi, right? I've always wanted to see the redwoods. So we're driving around between Ashland and the coast and back. It was just the most magical, crazy, wonderful weekend. We keep seeing signs for Rogue Community College. It's a real school in the Rogue River Valley. And I kept joking with my partner about wouldn't it be funny, if it was actually a school for rogues, like Poisons 101, Stabbings 102, that kind of thing. And so as we're joking about this, we start talking about who would the professors be? Well, who would teach at this? And we started brainstorming these professors and these character ideas. And essentially, those little ideas just sort of sat in the back of my brain. And after I'd fulfilled the contract for the first 3 books, we went back to Blackstone with Dark Moon Shallow Sea and said, hey, how would you feel about the high fantasy and epic fantasy? And they said, sure, but only if you give us another urban. And what else do you have in your pipeline or in your tank that in the urban fantasy space, we really would like something in that? And I said, well, what about Rogue Community College? And they ended up buying Dark Moon Shallow Sea on the contingency that they also got Rogue College. So it's totally an accidental book. At the time, I knew certain things. I knew that certain characters would cross over, like Argent. That was important. And I had almost finished the final edits for Debbie Druid. And so there are a few hooks into RCC at the end of Debbie Druid. There's a couple of things that I was like, all right, I'll set myself up so that there'll be some segue into the spinoff that makes sense without it co-opting the book. It is important to me that they are distinct. There is an Adam cameo in RCC. There's a spoiler, and one of my editors had said, I really want the Adam cameo to be more. I feel like it should be more than just one scene. And I said, no, because this isn't Adam's book. He has 5 books of his own. This is Isaac's book. So I made sure that Adam's presence in the book was brief. I didn't want it to feel like an Adam book. And that was the other big thing is this is not an Adam book. How do I contrast it? And setting it in the school, in the spirit realm, gave me that opportunity. In the Adam series, Adam is a fish out of water who goes from rural Oklahoma to Denver, and the spirit realm is always part of his existence. Mm-hmm. So his fish out of waterness isn't mortal to spirit; it's Oklahoma to Colorado. Isaac has a fish out of the water angle, which is that he was raised in a very unique way. He was raised to be an assassin among all boys who are stolen or gifted from their parents to be assassins. Most of them have magical abilities. And RCC is the first time he has anywhere else. So he's brought into the school by Argent in the first chapter, and which they, in order to be, because he's run away from the Undertaker, from the assassins, but he's actually there. He's actually at RCC undercover. He's there to destroy it. The Undertaker wants it taken out. And not on a date, more like a sniper. So anyway, Isaac's there to destroy the school, but for him, it's this whole Hamlet level of like, will I or won't I kill the school? In doing so, of course, the more time he spends and the more he waffles, especially because he starts to catch feelings for another student, a boy, he begins to doubt his mission. And that, he's growing, as we all do when we go to college. We hopefully, again, you're expanding your mind. So his education is changing. He's unlearning some things. He's learning new things, and he's growing up in all of these nice ways. It came about totally accidentally, again, but I really loved getting to play with different themes. I also get to ask some questions about education and have some discussions about, for example, he fails his first test, like his entrance exam, and he's like, oh no, they're not going to let me in. And the dean says, no, the fact that you failed just shows that you need the education. I've always found it weird that we have to take a test to go to school to be told we need to learn.
Yeah.
It's like, you've just proved you need to learn. So yes, come to school. So yeah, again, and that's me with my typical, let's see how we can flip things around. So yeah, RCC is,
love that.
It's a lot cozier, though it's cozy adjacent. It's not cozy. Also, it's whatever the opposite of dark academia is, cozy academia. Though it has,
there needs to be more of that, actually. I
think so too.
I would like some more of that.
I would love to do a true cozy academia, because RCC has some moments.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was fun to flip and play, and also it's the first book I've written that it's urban fantasy where the world is, no one cares that he likes Fran, that he's crushing on another boy, and that's just very normal to these students. It's also got some puzzle pieces in the narrative. I tried some more technically interesting things to me. So I like to say it's X-Men meets Doctor Who. There is some chronological pieces to it, and then the found family students with weird, wacky powers is very much an X-Men vibe.
You mentioned that this kind of started as its own idea a little bit. You had kind of its own genesis, and then it got tied to the Adam Binder verse afterwards. How did that make it easier in a way, or did you find that getting in the way of fleshing out the world?
The biggest problem was it's actually really helped, because I already know the world. I know how it works. I understand its magic, and then I get to bring in Argent, who everybody freaking loves. She's probably she and Vic are probably the two biggest favorite characters in this series. Seth and Dark Moon is over there. He's probably everyone's favorite. But more Argent is always a plus. But she's a big catalyst character too, and you have to be careful with her, because if you let her, she'll take over the whole book. And she certainly, RCC, she has some excellent moments. So if you're an Argent fan, you finally get to see her go off. At the end of RCC, she finally has a moment. There's also a great chapter that takes place at a Ren fair that I think I titled this one has chapter titles. That's another thing I did differently. That chapter is titled Ye Olden Times, but I should have titled it Argent Goes Medieval, because she gets to act as the field trip supervisor. So she has a lot of fun with it. So I got to show a more playful side of her, and I got to spend more time with Vran. And as annoying as he can be, I do love him to death. So bouncing him and Isaac off of each other, because they're just two idiots in love, was just a lot of fun.
Well, It sounds like you got to play a lot with this and kind of make it, which is important, because if you don't enjoy what you're writing, no one's going to enjoy reading it. This is it's more straight fantasy versus urban fantasy.
Yeah, it's high fantasy. It doesn't qualify as epic because it only has 2 points of view, and it's not as, it's 1,000 words. She's not as thick as something like a Tad Williams or a Sanderson.
But that said, the scale and the scope of it is wider, and there's something about the Adam Binders series that is, and the community college that are more intimate and personal. Is it just about the story problem that you're trying to solve, or is there something else that you are doing to affect that in scope?
That's a really good question. So yes and yes. First, the problem is at an epic level, right? We're at a world-ending situation. If the moon goddess does not return, the life will cease, and because the ghosts that. To explain to people who haven't read it or haven't looked it up, in Dark Moon Shallow Sea, the moon goddess was murdered, and without her, the dead don't have a way to get to the underworld. So the ghosts hang around as a blood-hungry mist, and if someone so much as scratches themselves at night when they rise, then the ghost mist will just suck all the blood out of them and kill them. And also, without the moon, the tides have almost totally stopped. The sun does some of them, so get that. But the tides have stopped, and the cycle of life essentially is slowing. So fewer babies are being born. All those things are happening, and the world is slowly grinding to a halt. So this book starts 10 years after she was murdered. And her last worshiper, Rafe, wants payback for her death, and he breaks into the temple of the Knights of the Sun, who killed her, sun god, Hyperion, to steal a box, and thinks that he's going to find gold or jewels, something he can hawk. And instead, he finds another man, Kinos, sleeping inside. Wanting to know why Kinos was in the box, Rafe steals Kinos. So the first thing is, yes, the world problem is bigger. The world is dying. The world is haunted, literally. Every night when it's dark, without the moon, this ghost mist rises. And because Rafe can see in the dark, he can navigate it in ways no one else can. Also, the people who remain, fire keeps it away in light. It can't pass through stone. So most people stay in at night. If you have to go out, you want to burn something. So like the City Watch, for example, but that means all the garbage and all the wood and the furniture is slowly being consumed. You're also much more careful about cutting yourself, so no one's shaving. No one's like long hair has come back in fashion. All these little things that will be in effect of it. And of course, the world can't have a big problem like this without somebody trying to take advantage of it. So we have political upheaval coming in the middle of it too. So the world problem is very large. And then on this other side of that is the small problem of Rafe, right? His feeling, his existence in this broken world, and that he would desperately wants to fix, but there's no way to fix. And when he opens the box and finds Kinos, there are signs and elements of that Kinos' presence that tell him that maybe, just maybe, there's something about Kinos that could help him unlock this, because he believes Kinos belongs to Phoebe, the moon goddess. I always like to work in the macro and the micro. At the macro level, the world is dying without the moon. It's too intrinsic to the mythology and the cosmology of this world for her to be gone. At the micro level, we have Rafe and all of his complicated religious trauma and emotions over his goddess's murder. Also, he was raised by her priests in her tower, and he's now living on the streets as a thief. He was supposed to be something completely different. He was supposed to be a priest or a scribe, and he loves books, and her library burned, and he's dealing with this intense trauma. So I really feel like we get the best lens when a character can show us their wounds and how it's affecting them. So he's very afraid of fire for kind of obvious reasons, and he's reflects on he's very angry and he's very curious, but that curiosity is kind of getting twisted through that anger of what he's been through. So
the character's personal story, his wound, his trauma, the thing that's driving him in this is it's tied to the wider mythology in a probably a less personal way, which probably helps with that scope. And in a way,
I'd say so.
He's tied to that bigger story in his backstory. There's something about this that is a lot more House of Cards, not the TV show, like a literal House of Cards where everything's kind of slotted into its place in the world building versus, and I don't mean like hard world building necessarily. It is more though structural, even if the walls are soft, versus Adam's a lot more like a journey where we're discovering the world as we go. Was that something that was an artifact of trying to tell this bigger story, or just from separating from the real world and not trying to find the magic within the real world?
I think so. I should also confess I wrote this book first. So I never meant to be an urban fantasy author, even though that's where I had the most success. I started out and you can see that again, like in Rogue Community College, where that high fantasy is really bleeding into the urban.
It's leaking in.
Oh yeah, I wrote 2 or 3 epic fantasies and couldn't sell them, and then my agent couldn't sell them, and so I had to sort of break out with urban before someone would give a shot on the epic. It won the Colorado Book Award last year, which was incredibly vindicating. Like, see, I can do this. See, anyway, so part of it is urban is very grounded. I don't need to tell you what a car is. I don't need to tell you what a cup of coffee is. You know those things. I can show parts of our world in it, and they all read nicely. With Epic, I have to stop and think about every choice. So whether I'm looking at what they're eating, I got this wonderful cookbook, Tasting History, that's recipes throughout time. I'm thinking about, there's no China in this world, so they haven't discovered gunpowder because they have certain technical evolution that we have, and they have certain technologies that we don't, and vice versa. Like, there's all these things. With epic fantasy or high fantasy, you have to really think about all of it. What are the economics? What is the impact of the moon? The city that Rafe lives in is modeled on Venice and Naples. More Naples, but give it some canals. And you want the crime and the unevenness. And then you take out the moon of that port city. Where does their food come from? If there's fewer fish, if there are no whales in range because of the way the tides. So all these little things had to go into my calculations around the world. And then the trick was how much of that to tell you without boring you. So I love epic fantasy, but it often can put me right to sleep, right? And here's the bridge that was built in the 8th year of the king's childhood, and it was built from stones from 800 miles away, and 10 of the stones were black. And so with me, it's like, okay, what is relevant to the story? And so hence the thinner scope. Also, as we move through our world, and I've said this in many interviews and workshops, as we move through the world, we don't think about the grade of the road beneath us, that the traffic engineers calculated that so that water runoff helps reduce hydroplaning when we're driving on it. We don't think about the traffic cameras over every intersection that the city constantly uses to recalculate across the city to redistribute traffic and improve its flow on a busy time. That's exactly how world building is for me, is that Rafe isn't going to stop and think about, oh, these cobbles that I'm walking on came from here or were quarried there. And he may not have that information, and he may not care about it. So for me, it's all about flavor. It's bringing in the detail that is useful in that moment, but do it without boring the reader.
Your urban fantasy books have had a lot of your personal aspects to them with your own story. Your high fantasy, however, it's hard to see that, well, I certainly wouldn't expect that you've had an awful lot of experience with, journeys to the underworld, or even like having your church blow up because somebody killed your god. What were you exploring personally? I'm going to make the assumption that there obviously was something that you were exploring personally with this.
I often say that if Adam is my better self, he's like my golden boy. He's a good guy. Rafe is my anger. Growing up where and when I did, I certainly was given it my own deep fair share of religious trauma. When I was Rafe's age, 23 in the first book, certainly had a lot of anger that I was just figuring out how to express and deal with. And I made some dumb decisions. Rafe makes some dumb decisions. So there's
stealing a box with a body in it or something.
Yeah, stealing somebody, not asking enough questions at the right time. And also one of the biggest things he does is fall for the wrong person, or fall too deeply for the first person to come along, is a good way to put it. And so there's definitely some experience I have in that. That's very normal when you grow up gay and isolated, and I grew up in a time without the internet, and there just wasn't the same amount of exposure and representation there is now. You often pick, the the wrong guy because he's the first person who comes along who checks the boxes and fits the criteria, and you become very infatuated. And that definitely some stuff that happens. And you see that with Adam too. Adam's first love has some of that. So I wove a little bit more of myself into Rafe. There are some positive things too about me that Rafe has. He is left-handed. All my main characters left-handed. Isaac is ambidextrous. Ambidextrous people generally are just left-handed with a preference. He is a reader. All of them. Isaac is my first non-reader. Rafe is a big reader.
It's always a good trait.
Yeah, Isaac is trying to learn how to read and more, and he still doesn't get it, but he's trying. But Rafe is a total bookworm. Adam enjoys fantasy novels, but Rafe loves to learn. He's very mind hungry. So he has his positive traits too, and he's very loyal to the people he cares about. Sometimes too much. He wasn't hard to write. Rafe came very naturally to me. The other point of view character, Seth, is actually our Knight of Hyperion. He was tough because I don't relate to him. He's very religious. He's very devout. He also has a lot of self-hatred around himself because of plot reasons that you can discover in the book. And writing Seth was a real challenge. And he was originally much more of just an antagonist, a villain, and kind of a bit more of a stereotype. And then the more time I spent with him, I kind of fell in love with him. I think I think more people prefer him to Rafe. Which again, there's a lot more of me in Rafe, so I take it a little personally. But it's funny how many people say, I really love Seth. He's my broken golden boy, but he was very interesting. He was very interesting to explore, and it's interesting to explore him in the second book now too, because we have a lot more to do with Seth in book 2.
Find the fun in anything that you're writing, I guess, and then it'll make it better. All right. To wind up, I would just want to make sure that there's an opportunity, if there's anything that you would like somebody's never asked you a question or something what do you feel like is missing?
All I will say is if you are listening to this or watching this and you are a writer or you want to write, just don't ever give up. Somebody out there wants your story and needs your story. It may take longer than you think. Dark Moon is a perfect example of that. I wrote that book so long ago. I thought it would never see the light of day. Now it's out here winning awards. People are finding it. So find your... If this is really what you feel called to do, to tell stories or make art, don't ever let anyone take it away from you. Always keep practicing and keep trying.
Good. Thank you. Where can people find you on the internet, in the bookstore?
Super easy to find. If your bookstore doesn't have me, just ask them to order it in. I do encourage you to support independent bookstores whenever you can. They're really critical. Just Google me, David Slayton. Don't forget the Y, David R. Slayton or David Slayton Books. I should pop right up. I'm on all social media. I'm not great at it sometimes. I'm not great at TikTok, for example, but I'm there. So if you're on it, you can generally find me. I'm on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, all of them. You won't have any trouble finding me. And then if you go to my website too, you can sign up for my newsletter. I only send one out about once a quarter if I have something to tell you, so I promise not to ever spam you.
Okay, that's davidslayton.com, everybody. Okay, thank you once again for coming. It's been great having you.
Absolutely.
Story is, first and foremost, a journey. A beginning that leads to somewhere else. But there's also the journey of the author. Every writer, like every story, begins somewhere, and the path and the obstacles they pass along the way touch the stories they write, adding color, depth, meaning, even metaphor. You bring your own past, your own story, forward into the worlds you create. Write the story that only you can. I would like to say thank you once again to David Slayton for taking the time to geek out about storycraft with us today. If you'd like to check out his books, you can visit davidrslayton.com, or you can visit the links in the show notes, which will point to bookshop.org in order to support independent bookstores. Following those links may also support this show in a small way. This is our first season. This is our very first episode. Hopefully, you got as much out of this interview as I did. If so, please subscribe to the show because we have other great authors we'll be talking to in upcoming episodes. You can also visit theepilogue.net. It's TheEpilogue.net. And sign up for the newsletter so you don't miss any future author chats. Thank you.